Hello and welcome to this launch event session on What's New in Server and Database. My name is Jens Møller Petersen and I'm the engineering manager in the Business Central server runtime team. Today I'm going to talk about some of the new features we have delivered in this release, and as usual I'm going to divide it into certain groups with the AL runtime, etc. But what is a little bit special this year is that we have specific sessions on several of the features we have delivered. So this session is mainly here to give you a shorter overview of all the different parts that we've delivered. We're going to start with the AL runtime. Now we have continued the work on collectible errors in this release. Collectible errors was shipped in the latest release, and it allows to postpone error handling to the end of a procedure call, and then you can get all the errors. What we have added in this release is that we have added overloads to test field and field error, so that they also collect errors if you specify the error behavior collect. Another change in this version of the product is that we've changed the behavior when you type in years using only 2 digits. In the online version, now typing a 2-digit year will evaluate to the range between 1950 and 2049 instead of 29 as it was before. For on-premise, the behavior is unchanged. The behavior is actually defined by the operating system settings. You can change that, and you can see here the dialog where you change it. Or you can use the server setting calendar 2-digit year max, which is now public, so that you can get the cutoff year where you want it. A more complex concept we have added in this release is isolated events. Normally we would raise the events, but if an event subscriber caused an error, then the AL execution would stop. Isolated events will raise the event to all event subscribers, even if some of them fail, and it'll continue executing. So it works just like CodeUnit.run. Each subscriber is executed in its own transaction. Failures cause the transaction to be rolled back, and we trap the error and continue execution. It also means that it has the same limitation as CodeUnit.run, that you cannot raise an isolated event if there is an existing write transaction. The syntax change is very simple. It is just an extra boolean on the event definition on the publisher. For the event subscriber, there are absolutely no changes. So in this case, the error that gets raised here will not cause execution to stop. An example of where we have used an isolated event is in the login process. We have added a new platform event on company open completed, which is raised after the company is opened. The system app subscribes to this and then raises the isolated on after login event. Now what you should do is you should refactor your code to use the on after login event. That way your code cannot keep users from logging in. Now if you need to track whether your code actually executed completely to the end successfully, then one way of doing that is to use a single instance code unit to track success, and then you just set the boolean to true as the last thing you do in your event subscriber. This way, if your code causes an error, then it only means that your code is affected. It does not mean that the users no longer can log in. I also want to reiterate that we are moving to .NET Standard because we want to follow along with the evolution in .NET. And for on-premise partners, this means that you also need to transition your .NET add-ins. I recommend moving to services whenever possible, because that allows you to reuse the same code for on-premise and for the cloud. The last thing I'm going to mention about AL runtime is that we have also made a number of performance improvements. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but rest assured that we're doing our best to continuously optimize the runtime so that it uses fewer resources. The next group I'm going to talk about is the web service stack. For web services, the main changes are within authentication. For service-to-service authentication, we've made sure that service-to-service authentication works better. It's easier to get to work, and that has been shipped as of 19.5. So switch over to use Azure Active Directory on premises. You can still use web service access keys. That is not the case for the online scenario. Basic authentication will no longer be supported in our online solution. So customers must switch to OAuth. However, we know that it is a challenge to move over. So in version 20, for existing tenants, we will basically grant an exception and still allow these tenants to use basic auth. We are communicating this to partners through messages in Message Center. We are removing the capability for new tenants in version 20, and you will see a desupported message in the product, in the user page, and in the user list in version 20, before it is then finally removed for all tenants in version 21. Apart from that, in the web services stack, we have also made some performance improvements. As always, we are mainly focusing on the OData calls, and in this release, we have particularly improved the ETAG calculation, meaning that for large data sets, that becomes significantly faster. We actually did find a little thing we could also improve in SOAP. But overall, we have now measured and compared OData and SOAP. And the scenarios that we have measured, OData is superior in performance to SOAP. However, there might still be scenarios where the performance is the same. As we've mentioned before, you should move from SOAP to OData, as that is where we invest. Now, for the changes we've made to the database, the main changes have been around enabling those of you who know about SQL tuning to leverage your knowledge also in the online world. We have added database insights as virtual tables. This is known as DMVs, or Dynamic Management Views, in SQL Server. And one of the ones we have enabled is the wait statistics view. This measures what the database is waiting for since the database started. So it measures how much time spent on CPU, memory, etc. In order to use this, you need to measure twice. You need to create a baseline before the operation and then measure again after the operation and subtract the two, and then calculate the difference and figure out where time has been spent. To do so, you will go to the database wait statistics page in the product. And from there, you can take a snapshot to telemetry, which will emit the values of each of these groups to telemetry, or you can share to Excel and then do your calculation in there. When you've taken the second snapshot, you can in Excel do the difference between the two. Using this, you can make use of the standard recommendations for optimizing SQL calls. The grouping we have selected is identical to the grouping that is being used in Query Store. Another database insight that we have made available is the Dynamic Management View for missing indexes, which tells which indexes for Business Central, that would be keys, that the SQL optimizer would have liked. And you can then go ahead and add keys using a table extension. In an on-premise database, you would have been able to open SQL Server Management Studio and look at the view as in the picture here. In the online product, we have added the database missing indexes page, where we have captured the same information, and you can then use that to tune the indexes of your solution. As mentioned, You can leverage all the knowledge that you have about SQL. You can look at the documentation. There are new documentation pages coming out from the SQL team. This is a relatively new one that arrived within the last couple of weeks about tuning non-clustered indexes with missing index suggestions, which is exactly what this feature is about. Last thing I want to mention about database improvements is that we have gone through a number of the error messages and made use of the functionality we delivered in last release of splitting the message into the user message and a detailed message, so that the error messages you get from SQL are now less technical, so not as scary for the end user, but the information is still available in the detailed error section, and it can then be copied to clipboard, etc. as needed. We've also done a number of performance improvements. The most noteworthy is the modify all support on companion table fields. That actually didn't work in version 19. So now this is supported in the same way as modify all on base table fields, which gives a significant speed improvement in these scenarios. Now, of course, what you see here are sub-operations. So unfortunately, it does not mean that the product is 7 times faster. It, of course, depends a lot on the workload. But again, we are continuously tuning it to use fewer resources. A big area of investment in this release has been within reporting, and particularly within layouts in reports. So we've added Excel layouts. There is a specific session on this at this launch event of introducing Excel layouts. So that's where you'll see all the examples, the demos of what you can do. I'm only going to touch that briefly here. However, before I go to that, I want to talk a little about multiple layouts per report. In version 19, you could only have 1 layout per type in a report. We have changed that by introducing a new rendering section in the AL report object, where you can specify as many layouts as you like. You can have multiple layouts of the same type, and you will also notice a new type which is custom, and I'll get back to how that can help our external reporting vendors as well. We've also added the capability of putting in localizable text to make it easier for users to select the layout that they want to use for this execution of the report. If you look here, you can also see that one of the types is Excel. We have for many years had the ability to merge Word documents or Word templates with the dataset. Now, we have built the same thing for Excel documents, where you can provide an Excel document, and then the dataset generated by the report will be merged into that Excel document. And then you can make use of all the functionality in Excel, building interactive reports, and use this very simple no-code experience. The end user can add or modify report layouts. And there are a number of use cases for this. There are reports that do not need to be printed. There are reports where you want to do further pivoting of data. There is monthly status reports that you want to distribute with custom charts and calculations. And we know that Excel is a favorite tool among a number of our users. To make use of this, there is just one thing you need to be careful about. That is to maintain the contract. The contract is that you should not make changes to the data sheet in the Excel layout. You should not rename the table, you shouldn't add fields, rename fields, etc. But you can reference this, build charts on top of this, or you can create another table which references this table where you can do further calculations, etc. before doing charts. So you can make all kinds of very nice looking Excel reports. When the user then downloads the report, and I explicitly call it download because when running it from the request page, you get a download button instead. And he will then download it to his machine and can distribute it from there on or share it directly. We've also built a new page for managing layouts where we have gathered the functionality for built-in layouts and for the user-defined layouts, where you can import and export the layout, create new layouts, etc. For backward compatibility reasons, we need to have both the new and the old page available in version 20. So the UI might not seem fully intuitive, but we do need to make sure that we're not breaking the existing solutions. In order to make the most of Excel reports, then you may want to create new reports rather than just reusing the dataset from the existing reports, because it allows you to tailor the dataset so that it lends itself very well to creating very beautiful Excel reports. As I mentioned, you can see a lot more demos of this in the special session on the Excel layouts. Now, we've also added some new reporting events, which gives you further control of what happens to the document that you generate when users run a report or when code generates a report. 2 new events: on after document ready for manipulating documents, and on after document download for when the file is ready for download. The on after document ready is raised when the runtime has generated a document, but before we call the on after document print ready. So this is your chance to modify the document. You may want to add a watermark to a PDF file, etc. This gets run regardless of whether the document is about to be printed or not. So it gets raised when the application runs a save as method, when the user invokes a send to action in the report request page, etc. And this event lives in Code Unit 44, report management. The syntax is not surprising. It has an in-stream and an outstream, so you will read the original document and generate your modified document using this syntax. It'll provide the object ID, and you can define whether it was successful or not. And then there's an object payload. I'm going to get back to what the object payload contains, because we'll see the same payload being used in the other event, the on after document download, which is raised after on after document ready, and also sometimes after the on after document print ready, when there are no extensions that handle the actual printing, because then we fall back to downloading the document to the client. Syntax looks similar to what you saw before, except there is not an outstream this time, because this event gets raised when the document has been fully generated. So you can no longer change the document when this event is raised. The report payload is a JSON object that includes information about how the report was run, what filters it used, who invoked it, which company, what printer name was selected, etc. This is a JSON object, and we might add to the contents of this JSON document in future minor updates. Another event that we have added, which probably has a smaller audience, is the new uncustom document merger event. I mentioned before that there was an output type which was custom, and you could then specify a MIME type. The idea here is that external report vendors that generate their own reports and have their own type of layouts, they subscribe to your custom document merger, and then they do what the platform would have done for Word and Excel now for their type of layout. So they will merge the dataset and layout in application code, and that way generate reports in the same way as the platform does. This event also lives in Code Unit 44, and it has a syntax where you get the XML data and the layout data, and you create a target document as a stream. I mentioned before that we are moving to .NET Core. As part of that, we needed to move the RDLC report rendering to a separate process. That process is a child process of the server process, and it starts and stops together with the main process. So you actually won't really see it in normal use. However, it has some very nice effects on performance and isolation, because memory garbage collection is now significantly faster, because reports use a lot of memory, but when we then need to collect the memory afterwards, it only needs to take what the reporting service has in memory and not what the whole server needs to do. So we've seen a significant performance improvement in memory management by using the new reporting rendering process. The only thing that you will see is that if you open Task Manager, you will now see 2 executables running. It has another side effect, or effect for that matter, which is stability. Because if the reporting executable ends up running out of memory, ends up failing for one reason or the other, then it is only the users running reports at that moment that get affected. The child process will get restarted automatically, so normal sessions will just continue to work regardless of this reporting process having crashed. So this will improve the stability of the product when we have very large reports. The last feature I want to mention is a small thing, which is the ability to get the report dataset as XML. So you call send to XML document. That will generate an XML document. Very, very surprising, right? You can then use that for offline creation of reports, for troubleshooting, etc. But you're also, of course, free to use the XML document for other purposes. Now to everybody's favorite topic, security, or more specifically, permission sets. This has been an investment area in this release. We know that it can be painful to set up permissions for users in the product, so we have built a number of building blocks to make this more user-friendly, more intuitive, and easier to manage. The first one is composable permission sets. You've already seen that in metadata, where you can have a permission set containing another permission set. You can specify that in the AL file. What is new is that this relation can now also be created when you generate it from the UI. So now Stan can create a new permission set which contains other permission sets. And we have a system table that exposes this relationship between these permission sets. But that's not all. The more important part is that you can surgically remove permissions again. You can add and exclude permission, which is effectively a local exclusion of permissions to this set. So in this example, we have a D365 Business Full Access permission set, which composes the D365 Basic and D365 HR Edit permission set. But the user wants to create a set for a given employee, and he does not want to give the D365 Edit permission set. So he excludes that, and then he even excludes the rights for the HR confidential comment line table. So he adds this exclusion. Now, of course, if this employee then gets both employee and super, then he can get those rights from the other permission set as well. So it is local to this permission set. But this allows customers to actually remove permissions again if we or the partners did not get the permission sets exactly as they wanted it. So to see the result of this composed permission set, you can use the new page Expanded Permissions, which will display the end result. What permissions did you end up granting or getting based on these exclusions and inclusions for each table? Now, another concept we have added is the concept of inherent permissions. This grants the developer the ability to elevate user permissions in a given code context. but this elevation is only granted during that specific method execution. What this means is you no longer need to add this permission to the permission set, allowing you to create more clean and comprehensible permission sets and improve the stability of critical code paths because it will always work. Examples of this can include reading general ledger entry to find the latest date. Well, to get the default work date. That actually, you don't want to give the user the ability to read general ledger entries just in order to get to that date. So that can be attributed with this inherent permission, and then it cannot fail regardless of what permissions this user has. Within the method that has this, that you have given this attribute, where you specify the object type ID and the permission you want to grant, there the user has these extra permissions. If an event is raised during this method, then the permissions are lowered again, so that event subscribers do not run with these extra permissions. Here you can see an example of adding extra permissions to a code unit and a table for this particular procedure. There are a number of limitations by design for inherent permissions. First up, we wanted to make sure we got this right. So we've been very cautious in the immediate release of 20.0. So we've only allowed it for scope on-prem. We do plan to make it available for scope cloud in a minor update to version 20. Furthermore, inherent permissions is limited to objects in the same extension. So effectively, it means that in 20.0, it is only Microsoft Base App that can add these inherent permissions. But as mentioned, then this will be added for everyone in a minor release. If you want to hear more about all of these permission improvements, then we have a specific session, What's New in Permissions, where you'll see a lot of examples of how this is being used. You can see more examples of composition and exclusion, etc. But I want to highlight what we're trying to achieve with this. First of all, we want to be able to simplify permission sets using inherent permissions, etc. Then some of the odd permissions that you never knew exactly why this was needed in order to give login, why that was needed. You can remove that with inherent permissions. It also gives the ability to create understandable building blocks. The end user should not have to relate to permissions on individual tables. Rather, we and you as partners should build permission sets that the end user can then use as building blocks. Another goal has been to remove the maintenance burden. We know that a number of customers have taken copies of permission sets in order to remove permissions. But then they also need to add permissions to that set if Microsoft or you add permissions to that set. So that gives a maintenance burden on the customer. That can now be avoided using the exclude permissions. And last but not least, in the AL runtime section, I talked about isolated events, which we have added to improve stability of critical code paths, particularly the login process. So hopefully with these changes and more coming, we will make the work of setting up permissions, maintaining permissions for users a much better experience. The last topic I'm going to cover is telemetry. We also have a specific session on telemetry, so I'm only gonna show the highlight of what's new in telemetry, which is that the addition of a telemetry ID to the user. This telemetry ID is logged in all telemetry calls in environment telemetry. So it allows you to troubleshoot what Herbert or whoever the user is experienced last week. However, the user or the admin can change this telemetry ID at any point in time. So the connection between this GUID and the actual username is up to the customer. So and you cannot from the GUID figure out which user it was. You will have to ask them, oh, this was something experienced by the user with this telemetry ID. Then a person with access to the user card can create that connection and can even change that connection again. There are extra functions for creating a new telemetry ID. You can also create something that changes it every night if you would want that. Of course, we've also added a number of other new telemetry events. I'm not going to go through these here. I refer to the other session on what's new in telemetry. This actually concludes the items that we have added to the product and that we want to present in this session. There are a number of things that I could recommend that you go do. Most importantly, move on from basic authentication. Check your customer's environment, what the integration scenarios are, move to OAuth, move to a modern authentication principle. Make use of the error telemetry. Use the new building blocks that we have given for the permission sets to simplify the permission setup for new and existing customers. Distribute good permission sets to your users. And then learn to make use of the new Excel layout feature. For that, take a look also at the other session. Which brings me to the related sessions, the What's New in Visual Studio Code and AL, in permissions, telemetry, and the session on introducing layouts. And with that, thank you for listening and hope to see you. Goodbye.